Welcome to Research Meets Reality, the small business edition. I'm Mike Locke from Aberdeen Strategy and Research, and today we're talking about the all-important topic of information security. And I'm absolutely delighted to have with us today Derek Brink, who heads up Aberdeen's research in the area of information security. Derek, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure. Hats off to you for conceiving of this Research Meets Reality series. I think it's been awesome. So good for you.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Well, let's why don't we jump right into it? Because as you're well aware, of course, we've recently launched a study into small business technology and trying to understand how small businesses, in particular, under 100 employees, are leveraging technology. What are the ways in which they're using it? What are the outcomes that they're seeing from it? And one of the areas that we looked at was, of course, security. So that particular small business research shows that data security, in particular, is one of the top reported technology challenges companies face. Yet the number one challenge is actually what they call a lack of in-house technical experience. So it's a small business. They don't feel like they have the technical resources to manage the tools that they need. So do you see, for small businesses, do you see security as a significant unmet need for these small businesses?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure the audience will be interested in this discussion. Just to drill down on the setup that you gave, we did ask, as you said, a question about top priorities, and I wasn't unhappy to see improved data security as the number one choice. Actually, the number two choice was improve the employee and user experience. That's kind of interesting. It just shows the extent to which security and the risk of our data has risen. And we also asked about this question, and as you said, we don't have the technical expertise we need to manage new systems as a number one concern. You talked about unmet need. I don't know how to answer that, except that there are really two goals of security, two main goals. One is we want to manage the downside risks that we have to an acceptable level. Downside risk is things like a data breach or unplanned downtime or that kind of ransomware is another example. So we want to manage that to an acceptable level. We can't eliminate it entirely, but at the same time we want to enable the upside opportunities. Businesses don't exist to do security. They exist to serve their customers and innovate and make money and so on. So I guess the main argument for saying that it's an unmet need would be, is what we're doing right now working? Are we able to manage that downside risk to an acceptable level? The research that we have done, our SMB research and other research, they and unfortunately too many of them have experienced unplanned downtime and data breaches and ransomware and compliance related events that are material enough to have to do something about it. So I'd say based on that data, it probably is an unmet need, but it's not for me to say. Every company decides for themselves what's an acceptable level of risk. So it's a qualified yes to your answer, question, but it's really you have to decide what's acceptable and what's not.
Yeah, I love the approach that you take with minimizing the downside risk while maximizing the opportunity for growth and all of the good things that we see when we look at small businesses that are growing. You talk about things that, if I'm a small business owner, it might be a little daunting for me to think about data breaches, to think about ransomware, to think about these are scary terms potentially. So, as a small business owner, how should I be thinking about security? What are the major aspects of my digital footprint that I should be concerned with?
Right. I guess I'm kind of a first principles guy by training, and so if you're the small business owner and you don't have a background, there's a pretty classic jumping off point for this kind of thinking, and it's got a funny name. It's referred to as the CIA Triad. It's not the Central Intelligence Agency. It's C stands for confidentiality. A synonym for that is privacy. So that's about protecting data, for example. The I in CIA Triad is integrity. That means, stuff isn't changed unless we wanted it to be changed. And then availability is just that, things are available when we need them, and non-availability is a problem. If things are down, for example, we can't run our business. So CIA is a really good lens to think about this kind of stuff through. Taking it back to what we were talking about before, uh, unplanned downtime. That's the availability issue. Uh, more than 50% of the small and mid-sized businesses in the study that we did had experienced that in the last 12 months. The C, the confidentiality one, that's the data breach, for example. Again, more than half of respondents in our study said, yeah, we had that kind of thing. And, we don't have that much to talk about in the integrity side, although, things change and when we didn't want them to. Some of that could get into regulatory compliance, with privacy laws and anything. But the CIA is a good starting point. And the key point is really to focus on the needs of the business first, and then not to focus on and not allow your team to have you focus on the tech stack. To focus on the business needs first, and then work backwards to what's the tech stack that you need to support that.
That's great. I'm taking mental notes here, but we'll see if we can put this up on the screen. But confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I think that's a
That's right.
really great. That's a really great sort of jumping off point for small businesses, and it's sort of rule of three, right? It makes it a little bit easier to remember, but it's also when you think about growing a small business and all the different things that you're concerned about, whether it's ops or sales growth, or whether it's just general technology infrastructure, you're going to want to keep these things in mind as you grow, because things change as the markets that you serve change, and the product changes and things like that. So that's a great framework to sort of jump off from for small businesses. So another question for you here, if you think about what characterizes a small business, of course, one of the things that probably comes to mind for a lot of people is the smallness of the company, but also the smallness of the budget that they have for things like technology. So the research that we just did shows that about half of small businesses, and that's companies with 100 employees or fewer, half of them have a total annual technology budget less than $50,000. And then for even smaller companies, so really startups with fewer than 25 employees, half of them have a budget of less than $20,000. So in the face of all the different places on the roulette table that they could put their chips, so to speak, how do you prioritize security solutions when you're talking about this type of resource limitation? Are there best practices that perhaps don't involve any technology at all that they should be thinking about?
That's a very shrewd question, actually. That there are things that don't necessarily cost. I mean, if for example, if employees are working with a PC or a laptop, then there are capabilities that are built in that don't cost. And sometimes security is just keeping your systems up to date. There's patches and updates that are made, and making sure that those are up to date takes you a long way. Things like stronger authentication than passwords is not that costly anymore, and so even the small budgets can support multi-factor authentication as opposed to just passwords. One of the attack vectors that the bad guys leverage a tremendous amount is the username password. They're just so weak, and so bolstering up that point of attack is not necessarily that costly. There's another sort of dimension to our conversation, Mike, that we're part of Spiceworks Ziff Davis. If the audience doesn't know, that's just point of fact. And the annual state of IT report that Spiceworks Ziff Davis does is coming out in September. So we ask questions in that report. Some of these have been shared publicly a little bit and come out at the end of the month in September. But I was looking at that data just to kind of get a sense of, well, how much are people spending? And I like to look at things in terms of the range of answers. In other words, I think it would be silly to just report an average or something. But if you kind of think of a percentile curve, when we took standardized testing, maybe I got a 98th percentile in math. That means that I got a higher score than 98% of other test takers in math, and maybe you got a 99 in the verbal section of the test. That means you did better than 99% of others. But when I look at the question of dollars of budget in the coming year to employees, dollars per employee, the percentile curve, at least globally, is well. Let's talk about the 95th percentile, kind of the high end. It's about 35K per employee, so that's a ton. And if you're talking about small number of employees, that's probably not where we are on the curve. If you back off a bit to the 90th percentile globally, it's about 11.7K per employee. If you look at the 75th percentile, that's the top quartile of all the spenders. It's about 3,900 per employee. The median is about $700 roughly per employee. So you can kind of gauge where you are, I guess, globally based on what we saw in the research. Take your total budget, divide by the number of employees, and you can kind of see where you fall on that curve. I think we just actually published a blog separately where you can kind of read a little bit more about that and actually click and get a table so you can say, well, here's my budget. Where does it fall? You can get the kind of exact percentile, at least to the nearest 1%. So it'll help you gauge it. And yeah, there are low and no cost ways to do things like patches and common sense behaviors. Don't click on stuff and things like that. But yeah, you can stretch the budget a ways. Good security doesn't have to be expensive.
That's great. That's encouraging if I'm a small business owner. So let's talk about let's go back to investing. We talked about budget. We talked about low and no cost ways. Let's talk about if you're actually going to be investing in security. So you mentioned things like data loss prevention, multi-factor authentication, things like that. Which types of security solutions do you think would provide the most impact, sort of bang for the buck, for a small business?
Yeah, really good question, and I think we can put up a slide here and talk to this. This came from the study that we did, so it's not what Derek thinks really; it's what we learned from the respondents in our project. The graph is. I'm a guy who maybe I don't know. Maybe I get too crazy fancy on these graphs, but I try to put as much data in many dimensions as I can. So the x-axis on the graph you're looking at now is the percentage of respondents who said we deploy this kind of technology. We had a handful of common technologies here. And so the further you are to the right, the more common it is that you've currently deployed that kind of technology already, or it's on your wish list. You want to deploy it, say, in the next year. The y-axis is that's a separate question about trying to get at the value to the business and rank it. And if it ranked in the top three, then the more likely, the more percentage of respondents said it's in our top three in terms of value to the business, the higher it is on the y-axis here. So you can start to separate. You can see a separation now of the x versus the y. And then there's the third one, which is the third question. It's the size of the bubble, if you will, and that represents the perceived importance to these respondents in terms of future growth and future scale for the business. And so you can basically look at this chart now, and you can see in the upper right, the furthest upper to the right. So it's mostly most deployed. It's the most value to the business, and it's also the biggest bubble in terms of future growth. It's backup and recovery, and that's it's interesting. I'll just say a quick word on that. We've done many projects on that very area, but backup and recovery is really protecting your data. It's one of the strategies for protecting your data. Sometimes data gets corrupted. Sometimes data gets compromised, say with ransomware, and you need to back up and recover. It's in some ways a data protection issue, so it helps it with the confidentiality of the CIA Triad. But it can be part of the availabilities, because again, take ransomware as an example. If you're hit with ransomware, you want to recover as quickly as you can. Let's say you don't even pay the ransom, but you got to backup. But you need to. People are idled. They're locked out from doing work, and so that's a productivity issue. So I'm not surprised. I'm actually kind of happy to see backup and recovery at the top right hand corner of that chart. Other things you can see on the chart have to do with, well, you can see multi-factor authentication there, pretty high. You can see a web application firewall. That's sort of protect, that's got a front end thing you put in front of your web-based applications. More and more small businesses are going web-based, so you can see that there. So you can see others scattered around. We could talk about this, and maybe there's other resources you can read in more detail. But things like the user authentication we already mentioned, and the backup and recovery, those are kind of jumping off the chart for me, and it's kind of consistent with our conversation here right now.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds to me like it's sort of the blocking and tackling of security, if you will, sort of the backup and recovery, have the foundation in place so that you can respond better to threats and things like that. It's like an excellent point.
Yeah, Mike, if I could add just one more quick point, the cyber
Yeah.
insurance companies have been kind of unprofitable for the past 3 years, and some people would say that in the last year they've been fighting back in the sense that they're trying to get their loss margins back in the range that they want them to be in. And so one of the things they've been doing is saying, look, if you want to get an insurance policy, you need to become a better risk. We can't keep losing money like this. And two things they're really pushing hard for are multi-factor authentication, which we've talked about a couple times, and also endpoint security, because the endpoints are, where a lot of bad things are delivered through phishing attacks and malware is deposited, and bad things kind of happen from there. So there's a couple areas where insurance is a driver too. And if you want to get a policy, kind of some things you have to do or you're not going to get it these days.
Well, that's super interesting, actually. Security as a way to expedite and smooth out the insurance process. That's huge for small business owners. I love that insight. Other words of wisdom as we wrap up here, because we could go on for a long time, but why don't we sort of wrap things up here and with any final thoughts that you have for the folks listening.
Sadly, I could go on for a long time. I like talking about this. I'm nerdy that way, but yeah, I think maybe my main point for everybody just to think about is that first and foremost, security is really a business issue. It's a technical topic. It's a technical field, but really it's a business issue. So if you're in a technical role, and many of our listeners at Aberdeen and Spiceworks Ziff Davis are tech pros, you always need to start with the business needs and the risk perspective. How much risk is there and how much is acceptable? And then we have to translate that backwards to the technologies and the processes and all the things that we need to deliver that. So I think that'd be my final thought to take away.
That's great. Appreciate that. A lot of great insights. I'll remember CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I love that point that you just made about the insurance process and security being a big piece of that. So, Derek, thanks so much for your time today. Really great conversation. Fair to say there's more to come on this because we've got a lot of great data, a lot of it very pertinent to the small business world, and whether it's related to security or some of the other areas of technology. Please check back for additional content from us in different videos. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Derek for being here. And have a great rest of your week.